Welcome back to the Talk Past podcast. Of course, I am the host here, NC, and guest host, co-host, guest host,
Hooray!
co-host. Go ahead.
I say co-host. I've been doing the Bears share of these.
Bare
It's
necessities.
it's me. Ring me out and hang me out to dry. Red Iron Riot, aka the War Queen.
Indeed, co-host. I think of guests, not guest hosts. So yes, we are finally talking about chainmail.
He's the second in our armor series, and man, this was a long time to get to because life hit me like a brick.
It does. So first we did padded armor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, padded armor I think is so much better as an armor than people think it is.
Of
I
course,
kind of
of course.
I kind of feel like we're climbing up the D&D ladder of armor. My perspective would be D&D 3.5, but we're not. I don't know if we're talking about leather armor.
Maybe. I think there's definitely some applications that are important to understand about leather armor, but it's a lot of it's anachronistic. What is that? Anachronistic? Is that how you pronounce that? Is that how you say
Sure,
that?
sure. Anagrams or whatever. Tittygrams.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
today we're talking about chainmail, which is apparently one of the longest recorded use of armor in history. Like from the third, like some of the earliest examples of chainmail come from the 3rd century, and it was up in use, until the 17th century, and it's still in use today in various applications. And that's pretty freaking cool, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty much one of the most popular, if not the most popular medieval uh, origin story. What am I talking about? It's one of the most popular armors from the medieval period, probably aside from plate mail. Because I think if you're gonna think of the medieval period, it's definitely chainmail and plate mail that
I
you're gonna
think
be thinking about.
I think people think medieval, and I think they go first to plate mail because it is so visually striking. But chainmail is definitely the like on the scale of armor. It's basically the top tier because of not only its protective ability, but its weight and its ability to allow for movement,
Yeah,
which not a lot of other armors can offer all those things.
it
Like if
is.
we
It
had a
is
ranking system, it'd be at the top.
exactly. It is the most form-fitting and flexible armor that was ever
Hmm.
made back then. Obviously, besides clothing, but the padded armor doesn't have that. Plate doesn't have that. But chainmail, it's don't matter who you are, you can wear it.
Hmm. Well, so you say that, but when it would have been, the heyday for chainmail for a good chainmail Bernie, I think it's pronounced that Bernie. Um,
Bernie,
it was heckin' expensive
it was.
because we don't, the whole handmade thing, the construction of the wire, of the rings, and especially when we get to the actual, like the real good chainmail, which is the riveted chainmail. That's a
Yep.
lot of time and a lot of work. Like,
Yep. So let's start at the first ring of the chain. Let's start where the origin story. Now you said 3rd century.
mm,
I'm looking around and I'm seeing one. It's attributed to about 500 BC to the Celtics, who made it as a burn. But however, it's also disputed because, uh, and of course I got to write it down so poorly, but the Etruscans,
yep.
back around the 4th century, maybe
Hmm.
sooner, had similar patterned mail. And I mean, obviously, this is something that's kind of simple, kind of basic. It's one of those sort of like they've sort of bilateral divergent or convergent evolution is what I think it is,
Yeah.
where two different things come up with the same thing because it works. But
Actually,
the
in
origin,
that,
I'm
in
not 100% on the exactness of it.
I don't think so this is going off of of the wiki. Um is that this is one of those things where you kind of, I think you have to follow the etymology of the item.
Hmm.
and some of the older, according to the Wiki One theory, that it originally derives from the Latin word macula, meaning spot. And I was actually, before I get too much into this, I think we had to have a separate episode for scale mail, because it seems like scale mail and chain mail get used interchangeably a lot, especially nowadays.
I see noted a lot that it was maybe inspired from scale mail.
Like, I could certainly see, like, and I couldn't find. There's an article that I really enjoyed, but I couldn't find it again, and it was actually looking at some Viking era chainmail, and how looking at these rings, they could actually tell that they were like flat cut. They weren't, the wire drawn type of rings. They were flat rings that were kind of basically punched out of a sheet of metal. And I can see a scale mail hauberk, slowly evolving into chainmail, because it's like, hey, how can we make this more economical? How can we make this lighter? And it's like, it goes from there.
Yeah. So I mean, chainmail is pretty much as old as dirt. It's one of the most primitive and basic forms.
So I could definitely see that evolution happening
armor in the medieval period. However, I think the height of its popularity was around 1300, because plate mail started becoming a thing more so in the 1400. So it had a good long time.
Yeah, in the 14th century, in the 1400s, that's when we saw, like, plate mail peaked, and then gunpowder showed up and it dropped right back down,
and nothing worked. But of course, what people don't realize is, moving up the scale here, it's not called chainmail, or at least that's not what they would have called it. Obviously, even shields, we have various names and stuff for all this armor. They would have literally just called it a shield back then. At least during the European medieval period, they would have just called it mail. It has just been armor, but it would have been mail. And there's some other names we kind of touched on, but of course, the Celtics, not to be confused with that sport team that I literally know nothing about except for the name. And sometimes it drives me weird. I don't know if it's Celtics or Celtics. I pronounce it Celtics.
I think that might be an interesting topic for another day, but I believe it depends on where you're originating from, like either the academic field, or apparently the sports field. I say Celtics.
Yeah, Celtics, because it's taken from the Celts. But of course, you touched on it briefly. There's different names for the different sizes of chainmail, or at least where it's coming down. Obviously, the chainmail was, in my words, chainmail, of course, and in the height of its popularity, covered the entire body.
Right. The most common thing you'd see is a full coat, the hauberk or the Bernie.
Yeah.
But that wasn't, chainmail's only strength, because you could make patches of chainmail to size. You see it being used a lot as aventails for helmets, as collars above around the neck and shoulders. And I think some of my favorite applications is when you see it actually on the underarms and the sides of the chest, sewn into padded armor.
Yeah, you also see it on gauntlets at times. But of course, a knee-high shirt would be a halberg. Is how you pronounce the mid-length or mid-thigh is the halbergen.
Yeah,
Virgin, I'm not sure. I know how. And then, of course, the normal shirt, right? The kind of shirts that we wear, which is just waist high, would be a Bernie. Nothing to do with Sanders. Nothing regarding sitting down and you're with some nice winter clothing, watching the world go by in your chair.
I mean, sounds nice.
Bernie chainmail.
But yeah, there's like you see a lot of, I think. I would say the 1300s is when you see a lot of the full length chain, because of the Normans, I believe. Like, I'd say maybe 11th to 13th is when you see 1100s to 1300s is when you see that more. And then and especially on armored knights, because you need that extra length to protect your legs. as you're riding.
If chainmail was invented today, we could have chainmail tank tops. We could have
No.
chainmail where you get the tie on the bottom.
Well, so we'll get to that later, but still,
Yeah,
it's the fun thing about chainmail is that it still has a lot of practical applications today.
exactly. So
So,
let's get into the practicality of it, the actual defense of it. So there's two forms of chainmail. I have a chainmail suit that has butted mail, which is
mhm,
16 gauge, I think by either 9 or 10 millimeter, which is of course the ring, right?
right,
16 gauge is the wire,
right,
and I have butted. Now,
right.
butted is the wire, which is just your typical at least mine is a typical 4-in-1 pattern. Has four rings connected to one butted mail. Now, butted mail is kind of weak. It
Yeah,
tears
butted
out
mail is
easily.
when you have the ring and it's basically you've taken the wire and you've made a cut you've made it into the ring and then you've cut it so you cut it loose from the entire the line of rings that you've usually use a mandrel
Yeah,
to wind into the ring shape. And it's not very strong, but it's especially for the modern day reenactor or just the enthusiast who likes to dress up. It makes a good, you still get the good coat. And the foreign, like you said, the foreign pattern is the European. It's like the more European pattern that you see a lot of chainmail use.
yeah.
And
This is
actually, one thing I learned, and this is really neat, is that a good suit, a good hauberk, a good Bernie, it would not have just the same size ring all throughout. The ring size and the pattern would change depending on the location on the basically on the shirt,
yeah,
for lack of a better term. Like especially
exactly.
around the neck and the neck and the front of the chest, you probably have a 6-in-1 pattern because it'd be a little more protection for that area. But the beauty of the butted chainmail is that if you are interested in crafting something, it's a good place to start.
Right.
You can go to a hardware store and get the wire and get something to wind it around and get the snips and get the uh get some pliers to work with, and you can knock something out like bam.
Exactly. And of course, the purpose of chainmail was to make sure nothing goes through. Back then, around the time where butted was being used, swords were rounded. People don't realize medieval swords started out as being a rounded sword, as in not sharp at the point,
Yeah,
like you would think.
it was
Uh,
more for hacking and slashing, not
exactly.
stabbing.
Defending. So chainmail helped to mitigate that. And then, of course, to get through the chainmail, butted, swords and other weapons started getting sharper. Now you see on YouTube, there's various videos of people testing out chainmail.
Mm.
Um, they never say what kind of chainmail it is. Of course, the chainmail is propped up against something. Blah blah blah. We'll test it cinematically on the channel, both forms, and show the practical use of both and how they would have been done. However, um, just wearing it alone, butted mail, because it's actual steel and such, unless you're making it on a modern
Mhm.
aluminum, is a lot heavier. It's a lot more gaudy to wear. It's more weight on you. It's just a lot more to deal with. You eventually get used to it,
Mhm.
but riveted is so much later. But
No,
me
are
personally,
you
like,
thinking? Or what do you? I'm gonna wait. Are you thinking that it sounds? I think you got that backwards because remember with the riveted chainmail, each piece has extra. Each ring does have extra material on it to account for that overlap for the rivet, and then you have the rivet itself. Because I have my chainmail is butted aluminum, and it's light as hell.
well, mine is actual steel. Mine is butted with actual high tensile steel, so mine's heavy.
Hmm.
I mean, once you wear it, obviously that the heaviness goes away. It's a little
Right.
interesting to deal with at first, getting it on, getting it off. Um, so
Because,
of course,
I remember handling Colin, and I think he has his is butted steel or no riveted
y-
steel,
yeah,
and boy z
I suppose it depends on the material, right? Back then,
that too.
I think they would have more so had iron to make their chainmail. They used iron for pretty much everything. In
Yeah,
terms of metal,
you probably would have saved the good steel for the weapons.
exactly. So, so I'm not
But
sure. I'd have to look it up. It's one of those cases where top of the head kind of scenario. You want to get knee deep in the research, but where do you look?
well, so overarching overall, chainmail, it is good defense against slashing. It is a decent defense against piercing because unless you have a very very well purpose made piercer, usually those rings will, and especially if it's riveted mail, those rings will hold up.
Not only that, but it's also good against blunt impacts. I mean, it may if you're doing it wrong, you may tear up that chainmail with a blunt weapon. But I'm talking about actual hand-to-hand combat. When I've
Hmm.
actually been hit, kicked, uh, body checked, or so on and so forth with a weapon, while wearing just the chainmail. Remember, I was even hit with chainmail while wearing chainmail, um, in my fight with Tina.
I remember
So
that. Yep.
it really glances all of that off. All of the hits that really would have actually been an actual strike and should have hurt, or maybe double over or something like that, or give me pause, really just glances off. You're just like, oh, okay, that was a hit.
Hmm.
Moving on.
Basically, if you
Really
found yourself in a medieval battlefield, you'd want to have chainmail because it would be able to defend against most of the attacks that would be coming your way. Now, you get somebody with like a Dane axe, or a great sword, you're going to be in some trouble. But that's
yeah.
because those have the weight behind it to actually do more damage to you,
You know,
with that
that's why
blow.
that's why I think it's better with layers.
Hmm.
Now, I think the best combination is padded armor and then chainmail.
Hmm.
Riveted, of course. Riveted
Well,
was later to adapt to the pointiness of swords. Granted, depending on how sharp and how hard, you might still be able to get through, but it was much more difficult with
right.
riveted. It's also lighter, as you mentioned. So that's chainmail evolving. But maybe if you put padded armor with riveted chainmail, that's probably the best protection you can
Well,
have.
I think this is going to be a common theme with all the armor we talk about. Everything's better with layers. Everything.
Yeah, absolutely. You want your base layer, your foundation to be padded armor
Like I
because
think
padded
most
armor is
most.
just
Oh,
good.
sorry. I was gonna say I think most of the time you'll actually see any leather used in any medieval period. It's going to be as a backing for chainmail, not by itself. It's a backing for the chainmail.
Which
But
I would still not understand because just leather itself just isn't gonna do the trick.
no, no.
You
But
know,
with
it just mm.
with that layer of with the layer of mail on top of it, oof.
Yeah, but I don't know. Even still, if something like a pointy spear gets through riveted mail, which it can,
It
given the
can.
force, like if you're on cavalry and you're just chucking it into right in the heart or something or whatever. I don't know if in an instance where you can just get right through. I feel like leather's not going to do anything to stop it. If it
Hmm.
got through chain, if it got through actual metal, then it's going through leather.
Right. All right. And so that's in European terms, you know, heavily used up until the 17th century even. Um, and
Or it
this
started to phase out around the 13th, 14th, no,
right,
14th century.
but still it was still a good choice for most soldiers when gunpowder wasn't a problem.
Hmm.
Um, I actually didn't know that. Like I know Japan had its own has its own armor traditions. I didn't know that mail armor, and it's called kusari, I believe, um, is was used in Japan, which is really neat because it's like, oh, okay, and they apparently actually used mostly butted chain,
Yeah,
though they did have they did use riveted. It was mostly most chain armor was butted.
yeah. And I'm not going to go shooting in the dark because I am not an expert in terms of
No,
Japanese armor and such. I'm more interested in their culture
yeah, but
over the
it's still
course of the
neat to
years.
know.
But
It's like a lot of stuff we talk about is very Europe centric because that's just
yeah,
where we come from. But it's nice, it's neat to know. It's like, oh, it's that neat little thing. It's like, oh, chainmail in Japan, chainmail in India and Asia and West Asia.
in Africa.
Hmm. Oh man, like apparently it's mentioned in the Quran.
Well, that one makes sense because there's a lot of trading between, of course, the Holy Lands and the circle of Europe we go around.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's obviously going to come back with the spices. When you're doing your spice route, you're also going to get other weapons and trade some armor.
Mm-hmm. But it's like it was a neat little. Hey, I didn't know this about mail, and look at going in my research.
I think that's a testament to how people really got around the globe back then. But then again, of course, that whole region. Of course, we're in the United States, so we're on a whole different continent. But
Mm-hmm.
that entire hemisphere of the planet is really interconnected and interwoven. Like there's a ginormous piece of land right there that you can just, if able, cross and reach China, Japan, maybe obviously not Australia, but you can get down to the
The
whole
Philippines,
southern Asian. You can get down to Africa and southern Africa, and there's so much
and you're
reach.
still basically on the same continent.
Exactly. Even if you're from Ireland, you can travel all the way to Japan, and it's quite a trek, but you can do it. It's not like us traveling to even Hawaii, or Russia, or perhaps more familiar, maybe the travel from like uh, Southern Asia to Australia.
Mm-hmm. Which is it's one of those things that you try to think about it. It's just so big. You're just like, boy.
Yeah, it's our planet is small.
Right. But so we talked a little bit about the traditional chainmail and its strengths, and nowadays you see it mostly. You'll just see it with reenactors. But one of the fun like modern uses for chainmail is the shark suits.
Yes.
Which is just like, you think about that, where it's like, oh, okay, so you're wearing a whole suit of metal rings in the water. That you
It,
kind of
it
you
makes
kind of brain short there for a second, but it works.
Yeah, although sometimes when I see that, I do think, because I mean obviously shark teeth varies completely from animal to animal,
Right.
but you can get sharks that have pretty precise pointed teeth that are, I mean, obviously they're
Mm,
wearing more than just the chain.
right.
Um,
I
but
think it's
sometimes
mostly
I'm
on the
like,
limbs.
yeah, when I see it, obviously I'm seeing arms. On your hands, you're wearing gloves, and it's obviously they're wearing a cloth. They're wearing a protective cloth over it, and then they've got chainmail on top, much like we would use with our padded gauntlets with chainmail sewn over it. It's just another layer of protection. But sometimes I wonder, because I mean, chainmail depends if it is it riveted or is it butted.
I think the shark suit mail is. Actually, that's a good thing. I really should look that up a little more.
Yeah, you
But
definitely caught me off guard with that because I was not thinking about chainmail shark suits with this episode, but they do use it.
right. Well, like I said, you looking
You,
into the armor. It's
you're gonna hear us both. Google. I've got a picture right here actually, but it's so fine.
I think the
It's
Neptunic shark suit is the first one
we're
that
on the
comes
same
up.
we're on the same website here. If you look at the pictures on
$75,000.
Neptunic, yeah,
7,000. Yep.
Neptunic.com, it looks so fine. So
That's probably
small.
why it works against shark, because you're talking about how shark teeth can be. It doesn't matter when those rings are. God, they look like, I want to say, maybe less than a quarter of an inch. So you guys give me specs somewhere. Give me specs somewhere.
Now that is so okay. So my chainmail suit and the chainmail suit I'm working on for the first blacksmith series on the channel is 16 gauge by 10 millimeter. That is going to be about the width of, oh gosh, yeah, maybe, I don't know. No, it's not quite going to reach the flat of a pencil. That's probably. I mean, I need to order a gauger. But if you're gonna gauge by Obviously, if you have a fully sharpened pencil, it's not gonna reach the flat end. The flat rounds.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
but I did accidentally buy a very tiny chainmail because I was stupid and didn't gauge my chainmail. You gotta buy a gauger first. Um, it was really tiny. Oh my goodness. I think that was like an 8 millimeter, and it was so disappointingly small.
Well,
But I think that's something more akin to what they're wearing.
right. I mean, if you just look at the images of especially the gloves, and you imagine wearing that kind of chain on your hand, the mental image of those tiny rings, and because it's a modern thing. I bet you money those rings are welded instead of riveted or anything. This is it's just a testament to how versatile chainmail is, and probably will
It
continue
is.
to be in the future.
You wonder if they may have done that back then. I gotta look if there's any really tiny gauge chainmail riveted or butted suits, because that when you wear it like that, I made just kind of like an armlet with the very tiny chainmail because I bought it. I paid 11
Right.
bucks for it and may as well do something with it. I'm thinking about making chainmail for my cat, but
But
it feels more like cloth. It wears more like cloth. When you're
mhm.
wearing riveted or butted, I mean, yeah, it's a shirt. It feels like shirt, but it's think of like a weighted blanket. It's more like that. Even if it's light, like Frodo wearing mithril. I think that one's more of a better comparison to what
Probably.
they're wearing. When you get smaller and more efficient in terms of maximizing the surface area that the chainmail is on, like
Right.
you're in a shark suit, I think it feels more like cloth. But go ahead if you had any opinion.
Well, I know this is just the shark suits. Apparently, there's like anti-stab vests that will use chainmail. Um,
Mhm.
used for butchers with around meat packing equipment, which is like that's cool. You don't think about this stuff until you go looking for it. And then, of course, the staple of any medieval or Renaissance festival, chainmail jewelry vendors. God, I love them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, I don't pay much attention to that though. So I'm basically a shot in the dark. So that we do a medieval fair, a medieval festival. We've got vendors. I like to, when I'm in character, I like to interweave within the vendor and merchant tents and actually interact with people in the
I
vendor tent
try. I'm not very good
and
at it.
and interweave with the vendors themselves. More so, I go in there and interact with the vendors. You interact with them, interact with the people. You get them more sales. So I've got like a top five, but I don't necessarily pay much attention to their wares unless I really like it. I tend to just act because that's what we're supposed to do. So I've never noticed any jewelry in terms of chainmail jewelry. So what is your line on that?
I I like it. It's it's kind of a style I enjoy. Um, when you look at something and you're like, I like that. I like how that looks. Chainmail for me is one of those things. And one of the few pieces of jewelry I own is actually a bracelet from one of the vendors that was at our festival, and it's just some nice flat rings in blue and silver anodized metal, done in it's a simple two lines of the rings, and I love it. It's really nice and it's really neat. And
So that brings me into something because you mentioned color. So
yeah,
historically, and I think we've mentioned this before, we're going to mention again when it comes to plate mail. Historically speaking, at a certain period of time and even beforehand, they painted their armor.
oh yeah.
So armor had paint. Of course, plate mail is going to be the more familiar one. And this is, I don't know how recent, but it's a recent discovery because of finding residue of paint on mail when you're doing the deep dive research as a historian that I am not,
Mhm.
and being able to have access to actual authentic material. But
Well,
I
it's a
wonder,
very practical thing to paint your armor that
but
some people might not think about, but it protects it from moisture, and protects it from rust, and it helps reflect light. So it's even for chainmail, that would be something important
yeah.
to be able to
So obviously
do.
we know of plate, but my question is of course, did they paint their chainmail? That would be a very curious thing to find out. I wonder
I
how
would,
you might be able to.
I bet if you could, if looking at historical chainmail, you could probably find remnants of paint in the rivets and around the rivets. But I could see it being a thing. They would at least coat it with something to protect it from rust. And you do see in some examples different material use just for decorative purposes, like maybe just usually a band around the arm, around on the sleeves, around the arms, as a kind of
Yeah.
finisher. I've seen some use where it's like you're really clever. You can do a design out of the rings on the main part of the hauberk. There's or you can do some designs in with it. It's just the what you'll see in at like stuff at like fair vendors nowadays is anodized metal, which way gives you the whole goddamn rainbow. Which I mean, I'm not going to play about that.
Yeah.
The world needs more color, man.
Oh, I would love to see more paint on armor in the show we do in historical documents.
And I think historically, most armor would be blackened because it just protected it from rust. It preserved the armor, and armor is an investment. You gotta preserve your investments.
Or even the colors of the house of the lord or the king, whatever banner was being waved. That would have been a fascinating sight to see a very colorful battlefield. It also would have been horrifying and traumatizing because people are out murdering each other and their pants and vomiting.
Not related to the chainmail, but that's something you see happen a lot in TV and movies. Is like, oh, it's medieval period. It's drab and dark and mud and brown. It's like, no, when people could get color, they would wear color. It was a sign of status and wealth. I think I don't know if you had a chance to look into this, but also I think something important to touch on is the Lord of the Rings and how when they were creating the armor for the movies, for the productions, how they basically came up with a way to laser cut leather to make rings and make a new form of chainmail using these weaves of leather. It's really amazing to watch. Adam Savage did an episode about it with a dude named Ben Eady, and displaying how this comes together, and it's just so cool. And as a reenactor and somebody who wears costumes, you get that look without the weight, and it, oh man. And
I just got an aluminum one.
Well, it's looking at the Lord of the Rings and looking at how much chain they had to make for the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Like they needed to find a better way. And if I recall correctly, what they came up with had a lot of industrial applications as well. Like another one for chainmail. It's really neat to see what creative people will come up with to get around issue of supply and shortfall and all that jazz. Love it.
Of course, everybody should love the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
We should do an episode on that. But
put it on the list.
Let's talk about some practical applications that we do. So, of course, I've got a chain shirt, which was gifted or handed down or
bequeathed.
I just kind of inherited it.
It was bequeathed to you.
Yeah, I think it was just vaguely inherited. Not stolen, just vaguely not stolen, but like just I think the other person just didn't need it anymore.
Well, in that case, it was bequeathed.
Yeah. So mine, of course, is heaviest, but it's steel.
Mm-hmm.
It's high tensile steel, and so I've used it every year that we do the show. I try not to, but maybe next time I do the show, obviously yes, maybe we'll find out. But I did it for my first 4 years, and because I was always just generic card number 52.
That's what I tried to do too, as well.
We don't really know you as a person or an actor. Here's card number. Blah, blah, blah. Go stand in a corner and look like a whatever. And I don't know, just kind of like I think for that reason, it always stuck me in a rut of just the generic guard or generic medieval knight soldier or whatever
Well,
crap. But it's very good for the workout that we do. You want to wear your armor at first so that you get used to it. And
right.
chainmail, if you're wearing it, you better do it first because after the first week of wearing it, or the first weekend, because we do weekend rehearsals, you're gonna feel like a noodle.
Oh no, I really like my chainmail, but I just always feel so awkward in it because I feel like I'm just a giant shiny marshmallow.
All right.
And that's my personal issue with it, but not. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, like if you get a real metal like mine, obviously it's gonna dull. You gotta be careful because it can rust.
mhm.
I kind of like that sort of dark, gritty look to it.
Do
But
you
I like darker sort of tones anyway.
do you remember when Kai was it Key or Kai?
E.
Key when Key was restoring his own hauberk and he had that sand barrel that he put his mail into to roll and was rolling it around like every day at rehearsal.
Mm-hmm. Using
Poor
orbital
Beth.
sander.
Yep.
Orbital sander. Yeah, that's something you can just throw in a pile of sand and just let it tumble down a hill. There's a couple solutions as well, but I think a few of us tested them out and they're about as useful or less as just literally just sanding it.
hmm But I just every time I think sometimes when I think of chainmail, I think about that, and it was just such a funny moment.
Yeah, but effective.
Oh,
You
but
know,
effective for
sometimes
sure.
we got to do a lot of weird things with our armor to fix it up or wear it. You know, like the chainmail shimmy,
Oh
where
yeah,
you're trying to get it both on and
the
off.
the chainmail shimmy shimmy cocoa puff.
Yeah, I think the taking it off, you gotta
Okay,
split
so
neutral stance,
actually
neutral
putting
stance.
on the chainmail, this surprisingly is one of the strengths of chainmail as compared to, again to plate or even padded a little bit. It goes on so easy. It really does. And the only thing you got to remember, you got to wear something over your hair. My man. Oh.
Unless you're
So,
bald.
unless you're bald. So one of the videos I watched to just to get back into the chainmail frame of mine was from Jason Kingley. It was Modern Knight on YouTube.
Mhm.
And he lovely guy, long hair, and I watched him put his hauberk on, and just like I was sitting there cringing because it's like, dude, cover your hair. No. Because I've had my hair caught in chainmail before. It is not fun. It
Yeah.
is not. Just made me cringe. But no, but yeah,
Yeah,
again,
we've all been
that's
there. We've all been there. You know, when you're taking it off, you got to go into neutral stance, bend
yeah.
all the way over, do a shimmy, do a little dance, maybe a prayer or some thoughts if you have to. They're about, get a couple of Facebook likes and hope it gets off without
Ripping
ripping
something
a patch
off.
of hair.
Yeah. But again, it's you can at least usually take it off by yourself. You
Yeah,
know, which that's something I feel that some people might forget about when it comes to designing armor. For world building stuff, it's like, oh, everybody's got this massive plate armor. It's like he's such a pain in the butt to take off. Ugh.
well, that's why they would have squires. I mean, squire would even take off the chainmail.
Right. But you don't
But it
need a
is
squire to
something
chainmail if you just got
exactly,
chainmail.
exactly. It is something if you don't have a squire, you can just take on and off easily. Whereas plate, unless you get it customized, which most plate mail was basically one fits all.
Yep.
But if you had it customized, you had that money, uh, then uh, then maybe you could have it made to where you could in and out yourself. But yeah, Squire would be letting you out. Hopefully they don't rip your hair out.
Oh man. Ugh. That's just that mental image every time. That mental image just ooh, yikes.
Yeah. No, we've all been there. We who have to wear chainmail have been there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good memories though. Good memories.
Indeed. Which, of course, is a testament to chainmail still being worn as protection today.
Mm-hmm.
Because we do.
So, yep. So, final word on it. I guess like we talked. If I were that we talked last time about how padded armor is a good, easy, very visually striking piece of equipment that needs to
Yeah,
be used more.
correct.
A good piece of chainmail can do the same thing, and just it's hard to overstate just how cool good chainmail is.
Yeah, so, I mean, of course, if you're going to go out in the battlefield, get some padded armor and then put riveted chainmail over it, and you are pretty much untouchable. You still have a head that can come off, but that body part, your chest, your heart, your ribs, those are good. Those are good. Your head, maybe not
Not
so
the
much.
ribs.
Unless you're wearing a helm, of course, a
A
camel,
coif.
Aventail, or a Pixane, a standard. If you're wearing something that is going to help you protect those areas, which of course, a helm could have chainmail too,
Mm-hmm.
glancing off the attack.
Well, I
But
mean that's what the
you never
Aventail was
know.
for. It's that
Yep,
it's that good flexible piece that protects your neck when you don't want a big old plate right there. You got to be able to turn your head.
exactly. And sometimes, if you're looking out and maybe the sun is in your eyes, it'll look like a nice shaded area in your helm because you got the chainmail there. Or if you're under the aurora borealis, it could be like a disco.
God. I'm gonna have to toss that at a friend. Hey, I have an idea for the chainmail shop you're trying to start. What?
Hmm.
Chainmail disco ball.
We'll put it in the shop on Patreon if it ever becomes a thing.
Oh man.
Okay, so
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 let's like what's a favorite example of yours of chainmail armor? If I could ask. Feels
well,
like
for me, I mentioned my visual preference is steel butted chainmail. That to me is your stereotypical
mm-hmm.
medieval chainmail. Obviously, more popular historically is going to be riveted, um, but it went away and paved the way for riveted. As
Mm-hmm.
everything evolves, when you're making armor or an iPhone or an Android or something, eventually it's going to get better. Hopefully, it gets better. Or you have a
Hopefully.
different type of phone. Remember the early '90s cell phones were just these giant
The
homunculus
Nokias.
things, and now they're getting smaller again. But,
Well,
I
I
prefer
mean,
butted for the look, riveted, of course,
for
for
the
rivet,
strength.
rivet for the obvious actual protection. But you know what? We we actually do hit each other. We actually
Yeah.
are out there, kind of like wrestlers. We're going to reference this a lot, but I mean, we're like performance combat.
Yeah.
We're actually doing it, even though the outcome is obviously choreographed. But you know what? We actually are hitting each other, even if we try not to. Uh, even lately. So
Even lightly.
butted for our purpose
Okay, so
is going to be good.
what
Yourself?
what what I mean is like, is there a character or something in media that you see chainmail in and you're like, oh, I like that, point at it, sort
Not
of
really.
thing.
Not
Not
really.
really.
When I see chainmail, I just think of the medieval period in general. I
Like,
don't think of I don't think of like uh, Colgrevance from stories of course, King Arthur. I don't think of John Comyn, as we referenced in the episode previous with quote unquote the Bruce, because they would have in Scotland would have worn real armor. They wouldn't have worn kilts.
yeah.
I don't think of King Alfred. Of course, I'm referencing people I've played.
Hmm.
Of course, Alfred would have worn a chainmail and a little bit of plate. So, I don't think of any one person. I just think of the period in general.
Right. Right.
Yourself?
Um. Well, chainmail. as good as the armored chainmail is, I actually kind of prefer. I've leaned more towards. I'm planning on getting a brigandine, for myself,
Yes.
and
Because
which
of chainmail evolved into brigandine.
yep, which we're gonna have to do an episode on. I think that'll probably be our next episode for this. But I've mentioned it before. I enjoy wargaming miniatures, and especially recently, there has been a lot better designs on wargaming miniatures with chainmail, but it's always such a a visually striking thing when you see a well painted miniature with chainmail, because it pops out so well.
Yeah.
And oh, I love it. And then another thing that I think, when I think of chainmail, I think of there is a book series by, I think, Sterling. Hold on, let me see if I can. Is a series of novels by S.M. Sterling. It's called the Dies the Fire, and it's basically kind of low tech apocalypse sort of deal.
All right. Is it medieval or like
it's
postmodern?
Postmodern. It's like post apocalyptic novel.
Is the idea like people kind of go back to the medieval period?
The idea is that basically this thing called this event happens, which renders most modern technology useless. No electronics, no gunpowder, etc., etc. And one of the main factions in the novel series, the Bear Killers, they're called the Bear Killers for a reason. They use they are well known for using chainmail, and part of the book, sometimes part of the story occasionally mentions the process of them making chainmail, because it's just so time consuming, but it's such a good armor to use. So whenever I think of chainmail, making chainmail, that book series always comes to mind. It's
quick
not
thought. Quick thought.
Go for it.
What if? Because remember, chainmail went out of business because of the pointed sword, because
Right.
of blunderbuss, gunpowder. What if in the future? Because we're doing it for sharks, but what if you can make chainmail out of bulletproof material? And then all of a sudden, chainmail's back into the fold, baby.
That would be a more compelling visual element than the usual cyberpunk kind of stuff you see, where it's all plates and lines. Huh.
It's all LED lights and Christmas trees.
Yeah. But it's a decent series if you like kind of post-apocalyptic stuff. I read it. I enjoyed parts of it. I'm not a super fan of all of the entire novel series, because of it kind of a lot of the good guys are pretty and the bad guys are ew, gross, nasty looking people kind of thing.
Cool.
Happens a little bit.
Yeah.
Also, it kind of gives it. Oh well, all the people except for here died because they weren't prepared and hardworking. Like,
It's very black and white.
Very black and white, yeah.
Yeah.
And I unless it's done very well, I usually kind of take issue with that.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting kind of modern look at how chainmail could be used. But
exactly, you should always, even if you don't like it, find something that you can kind of take out of it.
Yeah.
Everything is a lesson learned, an experience, kind of adds to the memory bank. But of course, we are out of time for this episode of the podcast, the Talk Past podcast. And of course, I am NC, your usual host, but this is our co-host,
Red Iron Riot, aka the War Queen, and this has been great to talk about. I've really been looking forward to it. It just everything kept happening.
No worries. That's why we're gonna have these other episodes with the festival series, where we'll talk with the cast and crew of the channel as we accrue and begin to do some live action videos.
Cast, crew, and friends.
Exactly, but we're kind of lingering. This is the tail end. So enjoy the night, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely evening.
Rabble dabble.